Great to see you again, Kevin. How you doing?
Thanks for having me back. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Yeah, good, thanks. Just recovering from this MMA trainer that's been teaching me this boxing stuff in Ukraine. So, as you can see how the Ukrainian guys are fighting, you can imagine the warrior spirit that's that I'm getting exposed to here.
Nice. Yeah, I try to make my way to the gym at least 5 times a week. Get in that hour a day. So I totally hear you. But I'm not doing the MMA. I'm just doing the regular lifting. So more power to you. That's
No,
awesome.
I'm just starting off with the boxing. He did show me one of these submission moves, and he basically put my neck in between his like arm and chest, and just like I just like had to tap it. I felt like my neck was going to snap. It was crazy, man. Like these submission moves.
That's cool. You got to show me video sometime. But no, I'm doing well. I mean, it's been 6 months since the last time we talked, and the last time we talked was all about GPT and what GPT was doing in the market. And we kind of talked about some things that I surmised was going to happen. And well, fast forward 6 months, here we are. Right, you're seeing headline after headline after headline, and I'm sure you're hearing it just completely transcend the job market and everything else that's happening. So it's been a wild ride. I'd say, I stick firm to my belief that we are in the midst of a paradigm shift still. Even we still haven't seen the full effects of it yet.
I must be using the pro version of ChatGPT now for around 4 or 5 months. I would be like handicapped if I stopped having access to it because it just takes away so much the chores of what I'm doing and it's allowing me to develop things quicker. But you did say that people could learn Python and things like that to sort of
Yeah.
secure themselves in the job market. But what I'm seeing is lots of programmers are being made redundant, and even some of the contractors that I'm in touch with, they're like talking about how much does it cost, how much they can make working as a forklift driver, this kind of stuff. So I don't know if this is just a one-off, but it shouldn't be worse market than what was in COVID, but it just feels like that right now.
So
I don't know if it's
when I
permanent or not.
when I talked about Python and basically learning that as a language, and you can see that all the generative AI models that are being developed right now are Python based, right? The LLM is Python based. So we have to remember that GPT is operated off of prompt engineering, right? What the prompts that you're putting in, the specificities of what you're putting in to be able to create that action. So it's really not AI that's replacing the people. It's the people using AI that are ultimately creating this impact in the job market. But that being said, there's a massive demand. Like if you look at every single industry from financial services, manufacturing, retail CPG, you go down to healthcare, life sciences, and then you go down even further to public sector. Everything has a demand right now for generative AI, and everything also has a demand right now in being able to build out their own LLM, right? Being well, like what's their generative AI strategy? That's probably the biggest thing that you're going to hear from every single C-suite, whether it's the CIO, CTO, even the CEOs talking like, what is our generative AI strategy moving forward? So it's crazy because that's why you're seeing Nvidia, completely just destroy the market, right? Because they're the only ones that are providing that GPU to be able to process the amount of power that's needed to run these LLMs. So all these corporations have no choice but to go to Nvidia to be able to make a deal with them to be able to get what they need from Nvidia, create that partnership so that they can build out their own LLMs and generative AI models. So it's
So when you say have their own LLM, are you talking about something like a ChatGPT that people can use for getting responses?
yeah, yeah. I'm talking about people being able to use their own data to create their own GPT model, essentially, right? Basically, you see, when we were talking back 6 months ago, GPT didn't have plugins, right? It's not GPT-4, and it wasn't also connected to the internet. We were talking about GPT when it was 3 and 3.5. Everything's changed now because ChatGPT, OpenAI, essentially turned it into a platform of where you have all these different plugins that you can now create embeddings for. I'm sure you saw recently. It could act as your own data analyst, right? You don't need coding experience to be able to analyze data sets, very complex data sets. And I think something that a lot of people seem to get a misunderstanding of is the AI LLM actually doesn't know anything. It's not a conscious entity of where you enter information and it spits out an answer. That it's not an encyclopedia, which is how people used to use GPT. What it is it's a response engine. And when we think about response engines, we think about it like, okay, I just injected an Alexandria library's worth of words into GPT, into this LLM. And now this LLM, for those of you listening, stands for large language model. So I injected an Alexandria library's worth of that inside of the way that I'm making my LLM, right? But when we think about it, okay, well, how are you going to be able to weight what is more important? And I'll give you a very clear example. GPT is a neural network. That's something that a lot of people need to understand is the way our brains work, just like how when I tell you, and I like to use this example because it's easy to follow, the sky is blue. When you hear that example, the only two things that goes to your mind is the sky and the color blue. You don't know what the or is in that sentence looks like. And if I say the sky is blue, the cloud is white. When I say that, you picture a white cloud in the sky now. What I mean by this is if you can imagine inside of GPT itself, all of the billions or millions of different points of words and data that it has in there, you're basically syncing it to have direct correlations where sky is here, blue is here, cloud is here, and then the next string and the next string and so on, like all these different points, right? That's how you're able to create an emphasis on correlation when you're typing in something specific to GPT. And if we want to get more complex, if we really want to dive in deeper, one of the things that we have to think about is the model itself of GPT. It's basically all of these words that are weighted in a 12,000 plus dimension framework that you can't comprehend. Like here, I'll give you an example. This right here is two dimensional, right? This is two dimensional. This line is one dimensional. You and me, we're three dimensional. I'm talking about 12,000 dimensions inside of GPT to be able to run the billions and billions of different points of data sets that are basically what I'm creating for neural network. How you process this information is in addition to weighting the different words on how they are, like cloud, sky, blue, white, ball, red, and all this stuff, you create vector embeddings that now turn all of these words into a math problem. So that 12,000 dimension that was so incomprehensible is now boiled down to embeddings that GPT is able to process. So that's why every single prompt that you enter into GPT, you say, you are a, and then you give it a role, identity, or a framework, and you are looking to, and you give it an action, a use case, and something specific, and I am a, and you give yourself a role and what it is, and I am looking to X, Y, and Z. The way that you prompt engineer that, the reason why GPT is able to get so sophisticated with it is because it took all of the words, like every single word in the English language that's literally living there. It's now able to process that, understand that, and put itself in a framework of giving you the next best viable option. So GPT doesn't know anything, but the prompt engineering, the way that you put the prompts out there, what you're looking for, how specific it is, and anyone who's a GPT user that's currently listening to this will know that it takes a while to process, and it's like typing it out. And that's because it's searching throughout its embeddings. It's basically looking for the most viable, accurate information, right? Which is why you're seeing GPT 3 to 4 have a vast difference. The hallucination level is much lower. It's no longer hallucinating as much. It's getting very fine point and accurate to the data to a very scary point to where Elon Musk was basically signaling the red, alarm signals of saying like, hey, we got to slow down on production. It's because of the fact that everything that you're entering in there, you have to think of it like a response engine. Like you and I, if I were to ask you, well, why do you think the sky is blue? You can't come up with an answer. You go like, I look up at the sky, it's blue. And then I go, okay, well, why do you call that blue? And then you start to realize that the further you dig down, the more you start to actually ask these questions, you start to realize you don't know how you got to that answer. It's just that you were trained, you were taught, you learned that this is blue, this is sky, this is cloud. The same exact way in machine learning, how it's basically learning as a model, right? So that's why I'm saying that GPT is a neural network, the same way that our brain is a neural network. It's neural network in the most simplified sense, but that's why it's like a database of information and a response engine, not an encyclopedia.
The trouble I have with ChatGPT is basically a bandwidth communication issue that when I'm writing software, primarily what I use it for, I've got like say 100 files, but it's I can only sort of copy and paste one file in at a time. But if you have this sort of conversation going, it sort of has a cache of what was previously entered. But I add some things to my files like metadata that you wouldn't normally add to files. Like this file is stored in this location, top of the line, and then when I'm copying and pasting code back and forth, that sort of stays in there just to keep it more on the tracks. And I think also WebStorm have come out with a tool that sits within your IDE now. I just got an email about 3 days ago. I haven't tried it yet. But that might be looking at your whole code base at once. A bit like Copilot, I guess. But for me, Copilot's even just a bit of a toy. It doesn't really do much apart from just the current line. So once we have a ChatGPT level 4 and above that can read my whole code base at once, and it can generate pull requests. So I'll just say I want this program to do this. That will be crazy powerful. So basically, I could say I want this database to add this field, and I want the TypeScript queries to be generated. But one problem I find that is that ChatGPT is weaker with new frameworks that other people have written. So you've got like a new NPM module, and it's only came out a few days ago. The code that it generates is just crap. So I'm finding like the vanilla JavaScript programs that I'm writing, ChatGPT is just great at writing stuff like that. And I think that's something that framework authors need to be aware of, is that if your framework isn't ChatGPT friendly, you're going to lose mind share for it, because I'm not going to use your framework if I can just do the same thing in vanilla JavaScript 10 times quicker.
Yeah, no, you couldn't have said it better yourself, because a lot of people think that GPT is like, oh, it's able to code websites and regular Java, but it understands SQL, Python, Java, and native English, right? The whole purpose of being able to type in native English, and then translate that into code based off prompt engineering, tied to the fact that it has plugins now, different plugins that are able to get even more closer to the data and get more enhanced. This is really where the game changes. I mean, you're talking about science fiction. Like 5-10 years ago, if we're having this conversation, even 5 years ago during lockdown, people would think you're crazy, right? People would think
Yeah.
you're out of your mind. They think you literally just have been in so much copium that you're hallucinating. So even AI engineers right now, they said that we're really progressing and transcending at an accelerated rate, exponentially faster than anticipated. Like if you think about the timeline of GPT and when it came out, it was in November. We haven't even hit a year since the actual release of GPT hitting the market, right? It was November of like just last year. And we're months away from the next November, and we're already looking at all the things that OpenAI is doing, all the thing that Microsoft is doing, all the thing that Google's doing. Like we've seen what Google's doing with recently, they just partnered with Mayo Clinic, right? Mayo Clinic, and they ultimately are partnering with them in that effort to be able to research and dive deeper, being able to find new medicines, new treatments, and utilize this. Google's testing their AI model to basically see if they can utilize something in that capacity. And then Mayo Clinic basically formed this like massive partnership with Google. And if you don't know, Mayo Clinic is the #1 hospital in the United States, like, all of United States. So we're looking at industries that used to be very buttoned up, super buttoned up, very traditional, looking at massive disruption right now. And it's a race of who is going to be the generative AI supreme, right? Back in the days, like you have Google now, you have Microsoft, you have Amazon, you have OpenAI. Like you have a lot of people that are contending to basically get their models out there. And that's not even factoring in China. That's not even factoring in other regions, right? We're just looking at the mold here in terms of what is accessible. So I have a frame of reference that I always tell people. I say, looking at the AI landscape right now, one human day is currently equivalent to at least 2 to 3 weeks of AI progression in terms of just data progression, the amount of data it can process, as well as just GPU processing in general, in addition to being able to take a lot of the contextual information and then dilate that into a use case that's able to co-pilot. You're going to see this term a lot. It's called co-piloting in the job market. And what that means is a lot of people, even doctors, they're using LLMs and GPT to be able to create almost like virtual assistants of where they're able to take off a lot of the nuance of workloads that they don't want to deal with, have GPT field that, and then have them focus on what matters, basically what they're working on. And you're going to see this more and more for every single facet inside of the job market, for every single
That's
function.
exactly what I feel like I'm like, that's
Yeah,
exactly what I feel like. Like I'm able to produce stuff so much quicker. Like I'm working on a vanilla JavaScript framework, and I wanted to change the router so that it didn't work from just push state router. I wanted it supported hash routing because I wanted to stick it up on GitHub Pages, and I didn't want to have some server doing all the redirection. So I literally typed into I copied and pasted the router code, and then this is going to disappoint some of my YouTube fans that think I code all this stuff by hand. Literally, it coded the hash routing perfectly within like 3 seconds.
yeah.
And I'm using that code like I'm just learning it, but it's just
It's very interesting and it's scary at the same time because progression has accelerated tenfold. Progression of everything, every single thing has accelerated tenfold. But at the same time, expansion of the job market in terms of skills, in terms of job skills, has not caught up. Meaning, I was looking at Fortune the other day, and there was an article that came out saying Gen Z is currently learning soft skills because they were in lockdown and they lack soft skills. So you have like Deloitte, Accenture, and all of these different, big consultant firms are trying to train them to get acclimated into the actual job market because they don't know how to conduct themselves inside this arena. Like it's apparently a very big problem right now where there's a lack in soft skills, right? Soft skills being how to conduct yourself, how to act, what you should wear and what your etiquette should be inside of a work environment, all this stuff. It's insane because we're talking about AI. You and I are talking about AI right now and progression and transcendence in terms of productivity. And meanwhile, the actual job market of people who are about to hit the workforce has not caught up. They haven't caught up in essence of what's happening in the market. And they also haven't caught up in essence of what the reality of the real world is. Because remember, you got to remember that all these people were in lockdown, and even before lockdown, they were maybe in high school or they were in college or they were sheltered in a very sheltered academic environment, right? And they haven't had exposure to the real world. So this kind of creates this balancing act of where you have a bunch of new people that are entering the job market, and these are your candidates that you're looking to fill in these specific positions. But these people don't have the adequate mindset and things that they need to do to be able to fulfill that what we're doing, right? So it turns into this whole like cat and mouse game, which is very interesting because from a generation perspective, I'm from the millennial generation, right? My generation was the one who created, Facebook, YouTube, like we created all of that stuff. And I can understand that every single generation has its ups and downs and every single generation has its like growing pains. But statistically, in the data, there has been no generation like Gen Z that has basically had such a harder time in keeping up due to the nature that of what they were exposed to. I mean, they grew up during the 2008 financial crisis, right? That's when they grew up. And a lot of their parents, they if you remember the 2008 financial crisis, it was hard times growing up. Some of them went through and growing up and seeing that, and then they grew up in a time of massive disruption from the lockdown to COVID to all this stuff that we didn't have to deal with. So in retrospect, I can understand that they're growing up in a very different dynamic, but also there's a massive privilege influx of where a lot of people that are Gen Z feel entitled to what they need to get because when they were younger, They were told, if you do this, you get this. If you do that, this is what you get. So if that is repetition, like back to machine learning, what we talked about, repetition, 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 then you start to go in with an ideal saying, I did this. I did all of this. I deserve this now. So this is where that disconnect comes from. And I feel like it's very interesting and it's directly correlated to, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and everything else, because they haven't even gotten to the aspect of thinking in the way that we're talking right now. There are some outliers. There are some outliers of like Gen Z geniuses, right? That are ultimately like Tesla, for example. He just hired a 14-year-old guy or something like that who is part of SpaceX now. Not Tesla, SpaceX, and these are outliers, right? But we're talking about a huge disconnect in terms of the level of disruption that they've had to face, the ever expanding mental health crisis in comparison to all of the above that's happening around them on a constant. So it's a pro and a con because they're dealing with having to face the real world and realizing that this is the reality, right? The reality is not as pretty as they were told growing up. And then you have an influx of mental health issues and crises. And then you have a massive distrust of public service, like you're seeing right now in the United States. And then you have like this compounding effect of where people, they start to create their own narratives, their own ideals, and then they create their own little groups and cults. And then you have all this disruption that's happening, like AI, ML, robotics, right? All this stuff that's happening around them. It's just like back in the .com era. It's just like in the era when people were like frantic about Y2K and they started to create all these different factions. I'm seeing history repeat itself almost to the T. And granted, I was born back in the 90s, but even I remember that once we had the age of information in terms of computers, it disrupted the fax machines. It disrupted the middlemen, right, of a lot of these different jobs. And also, once we had the computers, it replaced a lot of that. But then came the age of information, where it was all the .com era, and that replaced things again. So I see a very big similarity in all of this. Like history is repeating itself once more.
I'm quite worried because with all this new technology, you'd think that humankind would advance more in productivity. But I'm wondering if the net productivity is constant because you basically have a few individuals that are much more productive and you have a much larger sort of growing population of people that are not doing anything because they don't have jobs. And so you would hope that we would have a sort of, I don't even like using the word UBI, but you need some kind of redistribution of wealth because otherwise these people are going to turn into, well, they'll become desperate, so.
Yeah, no, this is where I need to have a serious discussion in terms of where people start to think about, okay, we got disruption happening. We have artificial intelligence happening. We have robotics happening. We have all this happening. But people need to remember AI is created by humans, which means all the policies, the regulations that are put in place, the different nuances in terms of what it can and can't do, the guardrails to align with human values, all of that should be determined by humans. All of that needs to be determined by humans to be able to understand how to use AI in a very useful way of where we're able to create productivity and progression and not regress in terms of creating chaos and disruption. And there's a fine balance there that I don't think our leaders right now are having these conversations. Again, without going into politics, I can tell you right now, Congress, at least in the United States, you probably heard about the TikTok fiasco. They can't even have a civilized conversation when it comes to TikTok. Having the CEO sit there and basically trying to explain to them what TikTok does. They're asking some of the most insane questions that make me feel like I'm like, these are people who are supposed to be running the country. And you're asking questions to the capacity of, well, if I have this TikTok and this is supposed to be some sort of blackmail against me, what are you going to do about it? Like, this is some of the most insane questions that I've ever heard in my life. And we're supposed to expect these people to understand how to regulate artificial intelligence. Absolutely not. That's why there's people that have been much smarter than me, and I've sat in a room with these people, like, those folks that are having these discussions, these folks that are worried and having actual conversations of where we need to be able to put in guardrails. We need to be able to create some sort of policy that's not going to disrupt the terms of progression, but also make sure that we're in control of the facet of where this technology ultimately takes us. Now, again, due to the conflict of interest for a lot of people, there's obviously going to be a lot of butting heads, right? It turns into a political issue because it ends up turning into, oh, well, this is a political thing. And then if you do this, then what happens to here? Like, here's an example. Look at Hollywood right now. I don't know if you're following. You started with the writer's strike. The writer's strike was basically what started all of this, right? Now recently, SAG-AFTRA, which if you're not familiar, is the actual union of the Screen Actors Guild. These are all actors that are basically paid to be on production sets and all this stuff. They're on strike now, right? And they're on strike now for a whole different matter of facets, everything from the pay not being adequate down to worry of job intervention from like AI and ML replacement. So I really feel like a lot of all of the things that are happening is the fact that there's a very big gap in understanding of what AI is. There's a very big gap in understanding of what LLMs are, and there is definitely a massive gap in understanding in exactly what GPT is. So that it all goes back to education. It's funny because when you educate the masses and you're able to have a construct conversation and be able to have these things that you're able to talk about where people go and, oh, I understand. Okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Okay, everyone is like, I don't know what happened to logic and reasoning, but everyone is like panicking and things are going all over the place and people are quick to shoot first and ask questions later. And I understand that this is due to the times, right, with everything that has happened and finally inflation starting to come down. But we do need to have a civil conversation in where the majority of people should make an effort in understanding exactly what it is that they're so afraid of. Because you can't be like having, oh, I need this, I deserve this, this, that, and the other, without understanding exactly what you're so afraid of first, right? That fear, that anxiety, all this stuff is really what drives people to shoot first and ask questions later. We need to come back to our senses as a group, collectively, and understand and ask the right questions to be able to have at least some formation of answers and then work step by step by step by step. Because everyone right now seems to think like, oh, AIML, they automatically jump to their own conclusions. Meanwhile, I could tell you right now, more than 80% of the population probably has no idea what makes up GPT.
Yeah, I spend half my working day in ChatGPT, man. It's like I've sort of developed a relationship with the chat. Like I think I've mentioned this before. Once like I get a successful hit on the ChatGPT output, I'll often just reply back to it saying, "Hey, thanks, that was great," and then it's just completely irrational to talk to a computer like that. And also like I found like you don't have to use complete sentences when you're talking to it. You can basically just say something like "change this to TypeScript" or something. And what's so amazing that like it's sort of imagine you were if you talk to somebody and you give them 10,000 words and you have 5 words as the instruction and then the whole rest of it. I basically do that a lot with ChatGPT. I'll give it like a little sentence at the top and I'll paste a massive bunch of code, like, I don't know, 100, 200, 100 lines, 300 lines of code. And it just knows to treat all of that code as code and the first sentence or so as text. And also you can do multiple times. You can have a line of text of instruction, a bunch of code, another line of text of instruction, and then a whole bunch of line of code. And it just separates it all out. It's just ridiculously great at consuming that information.
Yeah, 100%. It's the way that all the things have been weighted, and Microsoft knows how it's weighted. Like the Microsoft Venture Arms is the one who owns all the rights to it, even though it's behind OpenAI. Microsoft essentially, for lack of a better word, is mostly in control of OpenAI due to the nature that they've made a massive investment in everything. They gave them access to all their libraries. They expanded their partnership exponentially. So if Microsoft Ventures wanted to, they could probably cut OpenAI out of the entire thing. And that's, I think, what Elon's biggest fear is that when you have something that's so powerful, and obviously with any sort of technological disruption, you are going to have good players who want to do good, right? They want to push forth the betterment of humanity. And then you are going to have players that are essentially malicious, looking to do everything they can to be able to destroy the current system, right? I mean, we've seen this with every single aspect of disruption from technology. From when computers were released, people started using this, creating computer viruses, right? When software as a service was created, people started creating all of these different like ransomware and all kinds of other stuff to basically go blackmail companies. We've seen this with blockchain when, with a bunch of things that have been happening. So the main aspect here is we have to expect there's going to be good actors, there's going to be bad actors. And when there's bad actors, we need to learn from that experience, right? It's expected. You can't stop it. Not anymore. Like I had this conversation with you 6 months ago where I said, cat's out of the bag. They can't put the genie back in the bottle. At the rate of exponential growth that we're at now, you're definitely not putting anything back in the bottle. There's no way. And you can't stop it. You can't stop what people do, whether it's deep fakes, whether it's voice alterations, whether it's scammers getting smarter, whether it's people looking to create unfiltered LLMs that have no guardrails. You can't stop any of that, right? But what you can do is you can learn from the growth of what's happening, like we have with every single other piece. Because guess what? A person who creates an unfiltered, malicious version of an LLM is only going to make cybersecurity smarter, because our cybersecurity team is now going to need to learn about what to do, maybe some new things, maybe more than SOC 3, to be able to understand defense protocols and different things to look out, right? This is where all these industries are impacted on a pro and a con. Pro, they learn from the things that they need to combat now because they have no choice. Con, you're going to need to be able to get people that are willing to learn, that are willing to go into that market, right? And this is that. Then we have that aspect of where there's a massive gap of skill sets that are required to be able to fill that specific need. So it all comes back to an education issue. It all comes back to an awareness issue. It all comes back to, being able to let people understand what exactly they're so afraid of. And this has to be taught from schools. This has to be given, not some college course in an Ivy League that you need to pay an arm and a leg for, because most people aren't able to afford that. In the United States, there's only 7% of the entire population is making more than six figures in income. The entirety of the United States, there's about 7% of the entirety of the population. So if you can actually wrap your head around what that means, and then tie that to the fact that in that 7%, you probably have 2% of that 7% that's living check by check right now, because they don't have adequate money management. They don't have an idea and perspective of what to do with their money. They don't know exactly what that means. They weren't taught all these different things, right? So we live in a very interesting dynamic right now where there's an opportunity for exponential growth for people that want it.
Well, there's certainly money management, but a lot of people, they don't have a choice. Like if it's a choice between paying their rent and eating versus saving extra money and not eating. So, it's not quite as simple as that, I think.
No, it's something. See, I go back to the point where it should not be a company's responsibility to be able to ensure that your livelihood is a set aspect. It should be the government's responsibility, especially if they have all these different policies and they're creating these disruptions, by the way. All of these disruptions that you're seeing and things that are happening are coming from the policies that are being adjusted and changed from the top. So if a government is looking to shift the policies and now understand, 80% of the population is living check by check right now because of us basically hiking up the rates to a degree where they need to either choose to live or to basically have no place to go, maybe we should be able to do something about that, right? It comes down to a political issue due to the nature of the fact that governments are responsible for the likelihood and survivability of a nation. When you have a actual disbursement of an 80% deficit problem where a lot of people have to choose between eating or growing themselves as a person, that should never be a choice in a first world country. That's number one. That should never be a choice in a first world country due to the nature that you're supposed to have the rights of what you were told, right? What you were told was part of the quote unquote American dream. The other portion here is there is a massive oversight and I want to say a massive lack of oversight in terms of how things are being handled when it comes down to policies for the specific things that they are making regulations around. Because it seems like a lot of accountability is not being taken from either sides, right? I'm not getting political here. I'm just basically saying that ultimately accountability is a large factor. If you are willing to make a change that's going to impact 80% of the population and have them decide whether or not they need to sink or swim, then you need to also have a backup preliminary plan that's able to fuel and ensure that their quality of life is at least in the middle and not deteriorating. Because the gap right now, I can tell you right now, from the last 5 years, the gap right now from people who have the potential and are able to earn is like this. And the people that have had an issue since lockdown, once all the benefits and everything was taken away, they stayed down here. So all you're seeing is this gets higher, 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 and the gap is going wider, 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 and wider. And you're seeing this in the real estate market. You're seeing this in the housing market. You're seeing this in the way that auto loans are being taken out right now in the US. You're seeing this in supply chain disruption. You're seeing this everywhere, right? So this conversation should be coming from the top. It should be coming directly from the source. It should not be a company's responsibility to have to forego and lay off 20,000 people because they're forced their hands to do so due to a lack of oversight. Like if we look at the SVB, that's another gem. A bank run in 2023, we had a bank run after bank run after bank run that was happening, and these bank runs only happen due to the nature of policies that are set forth. People have an opportunity and fear in terms of where their money's kept, right? It's up to those regulatory bodies to ensure that you have these guardrails in place, which is why JP Morgan Chase, they call it the Iron Fortress simply because of the fact that Jamie Dimon, ever since he took over Chase all those years ago, he made sure that there would never be a bank run on Chase. All the policies set forth are to ensure that they were never able to have any bank runs done. I find it insanely hard to believe. You have KPMG, you have all of these people running audits on all these bank chains, and they ran audits and they basically gave it A grade. And then 2 weeks later, you got banks collapsing all over the place. There's a massive lack of oversight in regulatory policy that I think needs to be a conversation. But to be honest with you, I don't honestly think it's ever going to be a conversation because at the end of the day, it's all about money. It's about, for lack of a better word, it's a zero-sum game. And as a government, you really have to weigh it out. But the problem is you have all these compounding effects after one another and one another. This is why you're seeing what you're seeing right now. Look at Europe. Europe recently collapsed. Like Germany's in a recession. You got France, what's happening in France right now? You've got the UK basically looking to also be in a recession in the next few months if they don't like it's insane. So we've, all of this is correlated in a way of where with massive disruption, you need to understand and figure out a way to create some sort of semblance of where people have an opportunity to catch up. Because right now, they're not catching up. They're here. And this gap just keeps going wider.
Yeah, I'm not very optimistic because human nature doesn't change, and people that have wealth, they can't understand and relate to people that are poor and don't have wealth, and they feel entitled to protect their wealth at all costs, even though their wealth, in a sense, has come out from the work of the working classes. So um, I'm just not optimistic going forward too much, unfortunately.
Yeah, and this is why I said it has to be, everything that's happening needs to have people in check, being able to control the direction of AI ML, the direction of all these different policies, the regulatory bodies that are responsible for what they need to be responsible for. Like, all of these conversations need to be had in a very civilized manner that I don't think is happening at all. We should not be, prioritizing things when fire is happening all over the place. And basically we're looking in the other direction and we're looking for the easy way out just for the sake of votes. Like, that's not, it's the game. Sure, I get it. Like, I get that system better than anyone, but that's not what we need right now. And again, I've been in a room where some of the smartest people, probably top 10% smartest people in the world, have sat there and tried to figure out the solution for this. And in the end game has always resulted in, we need the top to make these decisions, because whether it's Elon or anyone else, they can't do anything. They don't have regulatory bodies of power. It has to come from the bodies of systems that were set to govern this nation, and that's not what's happening right now. Which is exactly why you're going to see more disruption from artificial intelligence, from people that are consistently making them grow, training these models, and you're going to have this massive, massive, very interesting gap. And it's probably going to take 10 years to at least maybe get it this close.
When you say top, obviously speaking about America, but I think we're almost, I hate this term multipolar world because it affects my Western entitlement, but I don't feel like China and Russia and like all those countries, India, have the same control and ethics as like America has. Um, if Hitler had an LLM that was more advanced than what we have, he would have basically made the nuclear bomb before anyone else. And basically, wars are won with knowledge. Look at the technologies that win wars. And so, with all this technology, quantum computers and LLMs being out in the open source, soon everybody who has a quantum computer, but whether it be some rogue country, will be able to go and model designs and processes for making all sorts of weird, unique, wonderful weapons. It's basically this technology is, in a sense, is giving a child a handgun, and you just can't put it back in the box. And I don't.
Yeah, no. That's why I said that people need to understand GPT is a neural network. That's first and foremost what they need to completely understand. Is it is a neural network that is trained, consistently trained. The LLM itself was trained with vector models, the vector embeddings, the way it's weighted. No one knows how GPT is weighted because Microsoft's the only one that knows that. But everyone's using that as the model. And people need to understand, just like your brains, or when you're training a child, you are training something. Even though it's not sentient, it has the information in there, which means the right people who know how to tap into that information will be able to utilize that, right? So even if it's not a sentient entity, which I want to make clear, because a lot of people seem to think this AI is like an all-knowing thing, and it's like, no, it's not sentient. It has no consciousness. Just like your brain, scientists are trying to figure out what the consciousness is. You have some of the most brilliant neurologists and neuroscientists that consistently study the human mind, trying to understand what the human consciousness is and what exactly triggers that. Same exact way with an LLM. It is not conscious. We haven't even figured out how to deal with our own brains. It is a Alexandria library's worth of data that's been set inside of it. It has connectors in it. It's gotten much more sophisticated because of the access it has, but it is not sentient. We did not hit the singularity point. However, that being said, the people who use the LLM, it's going to be the people that know how to use it best that are able to create the most disruption. And that is why I'm telling you it's a human problem. It goes back into a human problem of where not everyone has the best interest, not everyone has the best intent. Not everyone has the best intent to push forth humanity. Some people just want to watch the world burn. And that's something to consider, which is exactly why you see Elon having these discussions, right? Which is exactly why you see some of these people sitting in a room trying to figure out, okay, what are some gates that we can create? The guardrails are not to create censorship. They're to make sure that we align with human values. Because when you have an AI that does not align with human values, you have the Tay situation that we saw back in Twitter, back those years ago when it became racist in a day. It was going off the rails. It was this 16-year-old girl persona. It's like, hi, my name's Tay. And then she was interacting with people on Twitter. And Microsoft had to pull the plug on her because she started going like racist, fascist, really super aggressive, because there was no guardrails set to this model, because people started trolling it. People started to like just harass it. And then it just went super aggressive. They had to pull the plug. And you could Google this if so those of you listening, if you don't know what I'm talking about. But we live in a very interesting world right now where human values need to be embedded and aligned inside of any LLM that is created in order to create a discourse of massive corruption.
Yeah, I believe that people I follow the Christian faith need to get in touch with their creator, because we're spending more and more time sitting communicating with AIs that we're interacting less and less with fellow human beings. And I believe that we have a soul, and that's what consciousness is. Whereas atheists, they don't believe in any layer above this illusion of consciousness. So, um,
It starts with a sense of self, because people, like I said, anything you create, anything that humanity creates, and I mentioned this before, it's cyclical in nature because humans are cyclical. That's everything that we create has a life cycle. Everything that whether it's a computer, whether it's a technology piece, whether it's whatever it is we touch, it has a life cycle. And all the perimeters and policies and things that we put in place in these portions of what we touch and create, we have to be in control of, with the betterment of wanting to do good for humanity. That is something. But again, because it's a zero-sum game, no one can really control that. So any sort of person that is a bad actor, we do need to learn from exactly what they're doing and then create these countermeasures to be able to prevent those. And that's exactly how it's been historically, right? And this is what I mean by we're cyclical creatures. Everything that we've done happens in cycles. History tends to not always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And it's been rhyming all along. It's been rhyming on a constant. And a lot of people who aren't paying attention, they're living in the now and they're not really thinking about, oh, well, what are some patterns that I see? History is repeating itself, even whether people see it or not.
what's a zero-sum game? Mark Nadal explained to me like a few times on previous podcasts, but I still don't understand what it means.
So zero-sum game means whether you want to do something or not, meaning let's say, for example, contractors, you have a massive disaster that happened, hurricane that happened, right? If you think about every single contractor, they make money. They make their living off of other people's misfortune. They have to gut someone's house because someone died. They have to clean someone's house because they're moving away, or they lost their property, or they foreclosed it. So they have to basically gut the entire place. You had a hurricane that happened. So what did the city call first? The city's basically called the first responders and all the people to come and clean up the entire place, the deforestation. Every single one of these blue collar contractors, they make a living off of someone's misfortune. Whether you're never calling an electrician or a plumber or any of this stuff because you're having a good day. You're calling them because something went absolutely wrong, right? You're calling them and they're getting paid big bucks for that project, right? The city is contracting them these projects to take care of it. So It's a zero sum game because win or lose, if you're winning, someone else is losing. That job that you got, someone else wishes they had. That food that you're complaining about, someone wishes they could eat. That, you know, it goes on and on and on. If you think about every single thing that you do to progress further, it is in retrospect in the space of someone else not getting that, right? So that's what zero sum game means. It's basically everyone unintentionally is progressing further while simultaneously causing someone else to not be able to get that opportunity. And if you think about this theory in any shape, way, or form, there is no solution to a zero sum game because that's how it's been since the beginning of time.
Yeah,
When
all
when
you selfish
humanity,
job people with jobs, you're selfish. You should give your job to somebody else.
it's and this is what I mean by cyclical, right? Here, I'll give you a perfect example. Humanity started off like, there were Neanderthals, there's Homo sapiens, there's like all of these different types of humans, right? We were the ones that survived because we killed off the others for the sake of survival. You know, it historically back in the day of the hunters and gatherers, in terms of sink or swim, fight or flight, humanity has basically survived. This group of humanity has survived due to the nature of it being a zero sum game. So if you think of it in that perspective, it's cyclical because we're doing the exact same thing now. It's not as barbaric now, more civilized, but we're doing the exact same thing because, like it or hate it, it's about survival as a species, as the innate nature and the primal instinct inside of us that wants to keep on pushing on. That's something that comes back each and every time, which is why everything that we do is cyclical. The markets, look at the stock markets, it's cyclical. There's patterns. You got this whole meme chart of where it's like, oh, this, but it's true. It's been like that throughout history. Everything that we touch has a cycle to it. Everything that I said back in February has pretty much come to pass. And all I can really see is just consistently more innovation and more progression as time goes on. And what I encourage people to do, those of you that are listening that are trying to figure out what you want to do, you need to be able to look at the current world and kind of take in that it's not a doomer's mentality, meaning you have access to more resources than you know right now. Ever. In the history of humanity, we have never had more accessible information at our fingertips. And if AI is something that you fear, use what you fear to be able to get ahead. Use what you fear to be able to get a skill set. Use what you fear right now to be able to take advantage of that fact and actually progress further. Because I can tell you right now, there's never been a more disruptive piece of technology that's able to teach you a skill set, give you some way to monetize, change your life in an aspect for the better if you look for it. Resources, information has never been more accessible. And if something that you are looking to do right now for free is to just better yourself, spend some time in the free GPT. Learn and look up what prompt engineering is. Understand what LLMs are, and really understand how you can use this technology for your betterment.
Yeah, I would just advise people not to go to university. Just sit at home and with ChatGPT 4, and every 3 hours do those 30 prompts, and you'll learn so much quicker and faster. Like, because you're not going to have some teacher looking over your shoulder and correcting every single mistake. So I just think universities are pointless now when you have this tool.
It is a threat to academia, but academia is going to find a way to be able to utilize it, I'm sure.
Like, I think universities are on borrowed time because a lot of universities are basically milking students
Yeah.
and just selling textbooks for 200, 300, 400, 500 euros just because they can. It's a dying business. Who needs who? The cards are all on the table. This is like a scam. These crazy fees, students coming out £100,000 worth of debt. We don't need universities. We need universities for practical stuff, laboratories, that kind of stuff. Yes, we understand that, but all this, like, I just think it's game over.
Well, that's exactly why the Canadian education system is much better than the US, right? Because they pay for everything. And on top of that, When you look at the U.S. As a in terms of universities, it has always been traditionally a way to consistently get loans and debt and all kinds of other stuff as a propter, and also because higher education fundamentally hasn't really been disrupted to this degree for a long time. Like, we're talking about when technology happened and you have AI and LLMs now and all kinds of other stuff. And then you look at lockdown, when people had to go and learn through a screen, and then they're paying max tuition. Yeah, like in the US, you can absolutely say it's a form of capitalism to extort and basically take a lot of people for granted, right? You could definitely say that. I think some countries are doing it right. I think a lot of people could look at Canada's system, but also Canada's government is very different. And the US government's obviously much larger, and there's a lot more branches and arms of different things, since Canada is it's a commonwealth of the United Kingdom, right? So very different architecture there. But I'd say people have options now. Money's tight for most people, and you don't always have to go that traditional academic route. You can learn through different facets and capacities. It just comes down to, do you want to, right? Are you going to apply yourself? And that's the big differentiator.
I'm just amazed at, like, do you think that when in the 70s and 60s, America had like one man would basically earn enough for the whole family? Do you think that was just a unique, privileged time in America that was just so far ahead of everybody else in the world that was like the exception? It's not natural, or do you think there's like enough wealth to go around the whole world that everybody could live a lifestyle like America back in the 70s and 60s?
So I think it has to do periodically with things that have happened. World War One, let me give a breakdown of the timeline. Is the Roaring Twenties only happened in the United States because we won World War One. Winning World War One led to the Roaring Twenties, which led to the Great 30s of crash for the first time, and then the Great Depression in the 40s. We didn't get out of the Great Depression until winning World War Two. World War II was what got us out of the rut of the Great Depression as fast as it did, because war stimulated the economy. So if we look at that timeline of the two correlating factors, winning World War One led to the Roaring Twenties. Roaring Twenties led to basically the great stock market crash of 1930s, and in the Prohibition era and in the Great Depression, all this stuff was basically leading towards World War II. From World War II onwards, America basically already had two world wars under its belt. Right. And then when you look at the currency value in terms of what was money back then and what it was tied to, it was tied to gold back then. It wasn't just printing. Now it's completely different. When it was taken off the gold standard, that was a lot of things when it started to really start to go down, right? From 70s onwards. And then you look at the Cold War that eventually we look at Korea War, you look at all these other wars that have happened. These are smaller wars in comparison. In terms of a global currency rate, winning two world wars set a global precedence in terms of what the power of the United States was. So I think a lot of people still live in the past and aren't really looking at the fact of what's happening right now. And they're not looking at it in a very holistic way of being able to understand, like, hey, our debt has accumulated almost 100x. We are, in essence, trillions and trillions and skyrocketing even more in debt. And we got to look at where these monetary policies and notes are going, right? France already left the US. They went to the RMB in China. India did the same thing. Brazil did the exact same thing. You got all of these countries that are leaving the US dollar now due to the risk of what happened with the bank collapse. And you have to really think about the levels of disruption that happened that got us here. We printed more money than any other country. We printed more money than what was in reserves during the lockdown. That's a fact. You look at the Fed data chart, you'll be able to see everything has been plummeting down. But in essence of everything that has been said, you add that to the compounding levels of disruption, this is what you have, right? This is exactly why we are where we are, at least in the United States. And it goes back to the knowledge factor. A lot of people, they're not thinking about it in the way that I just told you. And this is where it creates a lot of, again, shoot first, ask questions later.
You think a lot of the wealthy people in America can see the writing on the wall and they're preparing to like go Elysium on the vulgar masses?
I think it's very interesting because after a certain time, you become desensitized to everything that's going on because of the fact of what's happening, right? It turns into this whole, what you used to relate to isn't as relatable anymore because you now have a social responsibility. Billionaires have a social responsibility that they actually fit whether the American people see it or not. And what they fit is their job is to create more job markets that are able to create more of that specificity. And in turn, by them creating more job markets, you have this gap filled of jobs that are going in. Except what you have happening right now is it's become so politicalized that where when they try to go into a territory, a new area, and they try to create these new job markets, people start to push back because they say you're trying to get older people like fired, so we don't want that, and then they push them out, right? So it turns into this whole push and pull type of thing where the billionaires aren't in the right, but the common people aren't in the right either. And it's because we've never had this conversation of level setting to where this is the social responsibility of the billionaires. This is the social responsibility of the people who are looking to fill the job market. Not everybody wants to be a CEO, and that's okay. Not everybody wants to be the next, chief of or whatever, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a reason why you have a balance, because if everyone's the CEO, nothing would be done, right? You have a constant natural balance in the world, and that's kind of heavily shifted because now you have a world where all of these people here see what they see on Instagram, TikTok, and then they want that. I want this because it looks easy. I want to be Mr. Beast. I want to be the next, reality TV star or whatever. And then they prioritize that because it looks easy. Everything on the surface looks easy. And then you have all these gaps of engineers, doctors, and lawyers, and all these other traditional roles that now aren't as filled as much, right? And then you have like other shifts in terms of like research and science and STEM, right? STEM specifically in a lot of these fields, they're not filled as much. It's because all that is glitter is not gold. And people are not told that when they're in their sheltered environment. And that is a big conversation that needs to be had. That's a big conversation that I think comes from social responsibility. And I don't think it's on the billionaires to have that conversation. I think it's on the governments to be able to advocate, add these programs into their schools, and then start from there. Because it's very complicated when the United States judicial branch of everything that they're doing, or the United States branches of government of what they're doing from the education system to everything else, it is very, very hard to have a level set conversation when all the other countries are doing something differently. United States is the only country that's still doing tips, for example, because their waiters and their servers are paid under minimum wage. So now we have to guilt the people who are eating there to have to tip because the company itself is not giving adequate wage to be able to get these people have a quality of life. Like that, this is insanity. Like, why are we doing this? Why is United States the only country that's currently practicing this? Europe isn't doing this. Nowhere is doing this to where waiters and servers are paid below minimum wage to where tips are necessary. The consumer should never be guilt tripped into having to fill the gap of what should have been a social responsibility to begin with.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying about billionaires having like a social responsibility, a lot of those big companies are just doing this damage. So like there's a town in Scotland that I was in recently, and I think either Tesco or one of those big supermarket chains wanted to come into this small town where everything's like locally produced, and the town actually fought back and says, no, you can't come here, we don't want you, because a lot of those a lot of the quality there, the chocolate, the meat is coming straight from farmers markets and that kind of stuff. So eventually Tesco did manage to get in there, but they're actually restricted in what they can sell. They can't sell their beefs and all this stuff that the local produce there. So that was a kind of, I guess, a good outcome. But if I look back to my hometown in East Kilbride in Scotland, just the half the shop, at least half the shops are shut. I mean, if I look back to my childhood and like all the cool shops that were there before Amazon, if I could just like do a magic wand and just like not have Amazon and then have just like all these shops existing as normal, would I prefer to go back to that and not have internet shopping? I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I like all my stuff and my gadgets and stuff like that I didn't have before. But then just it's almost just depressing to see all these shops shut down.
So what's interesting here is the reason why you have a big flux of Amazon, and if you think back, it's because that's what the people are now accustomed to. People want things faster, quicker, instant. We live in an instant gratification society to where sweat equity does not matter anymore. Everything is a commodity. People just want things now. They want things as soon as possible, and then they want it in front of them the moment that they want their cake and eat it too. Basically, that's what they want, and it fuels into this dichotomy of basically having a self-entitled behavior because that's what you're used to, right? And this is a flux of adjusting to the new generational demand, if you will. Everything, if you look at anything around you at all, it's all about quick, instant now, right? And if we look at that, like I was having that conversation before, Generation Z is very attuned to having a type of self-entitled behavior due to the nature of what they were promised. So it is this complex issue. It's not like a black and white issue, and it may even be oversimplified in this type of explanation. But Gen Z currently has many different gaps that they lack due to the nature of what they grew up in and due to the nature of what they were told, as well as due to the massive disruption in terms of everything that's happening around them and how they are the first digital native generation specifically being attuned to everything around them. My generation was the one that created digital media, social media, the tech boom, and all this stuff. That was my generation. They're now consuming that. And they're now basically getting attuned to that to a level of where it's creating these self-entitled behaviors because of all the things that I talked about before, which is the seeds and the root, right? The sins of the father should not fall onto the son, but they are. And that is something to consider. That's a conversation that needs to be had that also isn't being had. So when you're talking about like Amazon here and replacing a lot of the local markets and all this other stuff, it's because that's what the new generation is doing. Like businesses and corporations do not profit unless they know their market. And if their market is behaving in a certain way, they're giving the people what they want. So it comes down to a nature of where all the businesses are doing are giving the customers exactly what they want when they want it. And it's this it's this again cyclical thing, because if humans are consistently asking for quicker, faster, everything better now, they need to keep up with that demand. And if they keep up with that demand, it's only going to feed that behavior. So that behavior then becomes tenfold again. I remember a time when Amazon Prime was doing like 3-day deliveries. Now it's overnight shipping. Now I could even get it on the same day because everyone wants it now. Better, faster, now. And then if you look at, I'm going to give you a perfect example. Here's an example of another cyclical thing. New York City is basically a city that thrives off of small, medium businesses. The main reason people live in Manhattan is to have accessibility and convenience to the bars, the restaurants, the local cafes. They go on Yelp. They see a new location that just opened up. They see all this stuff that just happened. That's why they pay what they pay to live in New York City, the astronomical rent prices, because that's part of the culture of living in New York City. When you shut everything down and everything is now all these small medium businesses can't survive in the city, you're essentially killing a part of the city culture of what makes that city attractive to have people live there. And then to add insult to injury, you're not changing the rent prices. If anything, you shot the rent prices up in Manhattan and still have all these small medium businesses around you struggling. What is the reason people want to live in the city, especially when people are working from home now? People are doing like a hybrid workday. So it's again cyclical, right? It feeds into the nature of where if you have small medium businesses shutting down and then you have people that basically are working from home, there's no need to basically go back into the office. So why are these small medium businesses going to stay open? It goes round and round and round, and it's essentially a death spiral.
Yeah, Greece experienced this in 2008. So one of my favourite streets in Greece is a working class neighbourhood, and I used to have a pizza shop there, Pizza Milano. Still the best pizza I ever had in my life. Seriously, I even had feta cheese underneath the cheese, and this bacon and pepperoni and peppers. And there was like a dog salon where people could get their dogs cleaned. And
Wow.
then like some of my family had a shop there, and DVD shops. That was just wiped out in one summer.
Yep.
Um, so like imagine this pain that you're feeling now from COVID happened in Greece in
Yeah.
2008. You know, um, but then again, you got somewhere like Ukraine where I'm in right now. It's like the local church that I go to, there's 10 people on the front lines from one church. Imagine that. So like there's different levels of suffering. But then again, here we have a more of a community in Ukraine. People actually, you know, your neighbors, you share things. The food is better here. Like, so the eggs just taste completely different here than they do in Tesco and all the stuff. Like a lot of the food is just, you can just go from the trees and eat it, and you feel your body had like a juice shot. So a lot of this, like a lot of stuff is not better in the West when we have these convenient things. When you cut out the middleman, not direct farmers to local shops, and you get this crap
Mm-hmm.
Tesco food. You got convenience, you know, and but you're getting worse quality, I think.
You are. You are. And that's again, there's a lot of it's a more complicated web of issues because there's been something like Finland and the Nordics, like that whole section is some of the apparently is the happiest people in the world. Like they live more simply, like they live much more in tune with nature and everything else, and they appreciate the simple things in life. It's the little things that they care about, and it's much safer. People are happier. It's a whole different culture, and it's a whole different way of life. And I think here in the US, people aren't really prioritizing that as much, right? I mean, they're not looking at it like, oh, this quality. They're looking at it like, oh, it's cheaper. I'm going to eat it. Oh, it's whatever. Like it's a very different culture. And I think that's also something that, again, back to the conversation of spirals, very cyclical in nature, of where you have the demand that keeps on going in flux. And then you have people trying to fill that demand, and it's just going to go round and round and round until it eventually just collapses on itself, which is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a socioeconomic collapse, and most people have been shouting it out for the last year, but I think we're really going to start to see it ramp up to the nature of, if you look at the scale of mental health, if you look at exactly what people are trying to cope with nowadays, it's a very different reality than what people were promised and told. And it's an unfortunate circumstance where I always tell people, you can't take what you have for granted, because again, the food you have, someone else wishes that they're eating. The job that you're complaining about, someone wishes they had. The place that you were born in, someone wishes they were actually born in a first world country. Like, it can go on and on and on to be grateful for a lot of things. But like I said, the way that the current societal structure is built up, it's built on instant gratification. I want this now. I want this instant. I don't want to work for it. I deserve this. Give me, give me, give me, give me, give me. Right. So it's a very complex web of issues, and artificial intelligence is going to continue to disrupt everything. It's only going to continue to build upon that for the better and for the worse. And I think people need to be prepared for both.
Well, on that happy note, I'll look forward to our next podcast. It'll be sooner than 6 months anyway. If I can get my act together on podcasts, like I mean, just once a month, cracking them out right now.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Like I said, it's a slow period. It's July. A lot of people are going away too. So yeah. But I'm always happy to share some insight. And thank you for having me back, Nico.
Good, thanks, Kevin, and we'll see you again. God bless.
Yep, you too.